take my hand, come with me, take your time.
Abdullah ibn al-Abbas was among the great companions of the Prophet ﷺ, and we will mention a few things about his biography inshaAllah ta'ala. He was among those who supported the Prophet, and he was among those who loved the Prophet ﷺ, and he was also among the relatives of the Prophet ﷺ. He was the cousin of the Prophet ﷺ. And as we mentioned, his name is Abdullah ibn Abbas, and his kunya was Abu al-Abbas. Right? So he is Abdullah, the son of Abbas, and he also had the kunya Abu al-Abbas, mashallah. And Abdullah ibn Abbas, was among those who used to serve the Prophet ﷺ and used to enjoy being around the Prophet. Whenever he had an opportunity to learn from the Prophet, he would be with the Prophet ﷺ. And it was mentioned that he once went to his aunt's house named Maymuna. He has an aunt named Maymuna, and he would often go to her house when the Prophet ﷺ was going to sleep at her house, because Maymuna was also the wife of the Prophet. She was one of the wives of the Prophet. So whenever the Prophet ﷺ was going to sleep and stay with his wife Maymuna on that night, Abdullah ibn Abbas would intentionally go to his aunt's house and say, I want to sleep at your house this evening. And this is what he would do, subhanallah. Why did he do that? Why was his main reason of sleeping at his aunt's house when the Prophet ﷺ was there? So that he can be around the Prophet, because he wants to learn from the Prophet. He wants to see how he lives, right? To learn from him, subhanallah. So because of his desire and love to learn from the Prophet ﷺ, he would do things like this. And among the things that he would do to serve the Prophet is that he would bring his slippers, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Imagine. And out of love for the Prophet, he would go and sometimes he would bring the slippers of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And also Abdullah ibn Abbas, it was known that he would bring the water for the Prophet alayhi salatu wasallam, so that he may perform his purification. And this is what happened, subhanallah. On one of those nights when the Prophet alayhi salatu wasallam was sleeping at his wife's house Maymuna, one night the Prophet alayhi salatu wasallam stood up from sleep. He woke up and he wanted to perform his prayer. So as soon as he woke up, what did he see? He saw Abdullah ibn Abbas right in front of him with a pitcher of water ready prepared for him, so that he may perform his purification, and then he may perform his prayer. So when the Prophet ﷺ saw this, he was happy, and to see this motivation from a child. So what did he do alayhi salam? He made dua for Abdullah ibn Abbas. And he said, Allahumma faqihu fid din wa allimhu at-ta'wil. Oh Allah, make him knowledgeable in the religion and teach him and make him knowledgeable of the interpretation of the Quran. And the Prophet's dua was accepted. So Abdullah ibn Abbas became one of the most knowledgeable companions. Subhanallah. Of course he exerted effort to learn, right? To learn, to increase in knowledge. Yes, he did exert effort. But the Prophet ﷺ made dua for him that he becomes knowledgeable. And because of the Prophet's dua, and it was accepted, the ways of the path to knowledge was made easy for him. Allah Ta'ala facilitated for Abdullah ibn Abbas many routes of knowledge. Subhanallah. And he had many nicknames that connotate and indicate that he was among the most knowledgeable of the companions. Among these nicknames was Tarjuman al-Quran, the interpreter of the Quran. Subhanallah. Why? Once again, back to the dua of the Prophet. The Prophet's dua was accepted. MashaAllah. He also had another nickname, Habrul Ummah. MashaAllah. And Habr in Arabic means ink. Right? And this is to indicate that he was very knowledgeable in the religion. MashaAllah. Ya Allah. He also had a nickname, Al-Bahr. And Bahr in Arabic means sea. So they gave him this nickname of the sea to indicate that he was very knowledgeable. So they're comparing him in terms of knowledge to that of a sea. Subhanallah. You can see how vast and how big a sea is. MashaAllah. So Abdullah ibn Abbas also had a vast amount of knowledge. This is what they're trying to indicate with this nickname. May Allah Ta'ala make us benefit from him. Subhanallah. He was among the most knowledgeable of the companions. And Abdullah ibn Abbas was very humble. MashaAllah. In acquiring the knowledge, when he was seeking the knowledge, he was very humble in seeking it. He wasn't arrogant. He wouldn't go to people, knock on their doors. I'm Abdullah ibn Abbas, the relative of the Prophet. Open the doors for me. I want to learn. He wasn't like that, subhanAllah. He was very humble. Even though the companions used to love him. And they used to love him because he was among the companions, because he was among the relatives of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And they knew that. So they would honor him and they would respect him and they would love to treat him in good ways, subhanAllah, because of his relationship to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But he wasn't arrogant, and he would not use this to his advantage, to acquire knowledge. No, he wouldn't do that. And there's a very famous story that occurred with Abdullah ibn Abbas, that once he wanted to learn from one of the companions. So he went to the companion's house. But when he got to the house, what did he do? He waited outside the doors, and he waiting for him to come out. He didn't knock on the door. I'm Abdullah ibn Abbas, open the door, I want to learn from you. He didn't do that. I'm one of the relatives of the Prophet, open the door. He didn't do that, subhanAllah. Why? Even though he could have knocked on the door and said in a nice way, I want to learn from you this hadith. He could have done that, but he didn't. He chose to humble himself. He did not want to disturb his teacher. He didn't want to disturb his teacher. He knew that he's at home. He might be doing certain things with his family, whatever it is. I don't want to disturb him. I'm going to wait, no matter how long it takes. I'm going to wait outside until he's finished and he sees me outside. And this is what he did. So he waited outside hours, waiting for the teacher that he wanted to learn from to come out. Subhanallah, waiting for hours. And we're talking about waiting outside in the Arabian Peninsula, brothers and sisters. We're not talking about waiting outside the building over here where you have a shelter, where you have shade, you have water, access to many things. No, we're talking about waiting outside in the Arabian Peninsula, a desert. Subhanallah. And this is the past. And many years ago, 1400 years ago, they didn't have buildings like they do now in Saudi Arabia and other places like that. We're talking about in a desert. And when the companion finally came out and he opened the door and he saw Abdullah ibn Abbas in front of him, he saw Abdullah ibn Abbas with dirt and dust on his face. His hair was out of order, because he's waiting in a climate that's not the most suitable to be outside in the scorching sun, subhanallah. But why did Abdullah ibn Abbas do this? To humble himself for the knowledge. He wanted the love of knowledge to be firmly rooted in his heart. And brothers and sisters, if somebody takes the extra measure like this and he humbles himself and humiliates himself in this context, mashallah, it leaves a mark in a person's heart, and it leaves a certain appreciation in that individual's heart for the knowledge that he's learning. Not like we have nowadays where everything's on the internet, Skype, on the phone. People in the past used to travel far distances so that they may acquire knowledge. And when they exert this effort, when they finally reach and learn what they want, they put it into their hearts and they treasure it and they appreciate it, and it lasts with them longer than it does. People like us, we learn something, ask us a couple of hours, or the next day we forget it. Why? Because everything's so easy for us. Subhanallah. Had you exerted the effort and spent the time to learn it properly, and it would leave a mark in somebody's heart. Subhanallah. And Abdullah ibn Abbas, he had a strong love for the knowledge, and it left a mark in his heart. Subhanallah. So doing things like this was very easy for him. It was not difficult. It was not difficult at all. He even said about himself, ضَلَلْتُ طَالِبًا لِطَالِبِ الْعِلْمِ فَعَزَزْتُ مَطْلُوبًا, that I humbled myself in seeking the knowledge, and because of that I became aziz and I became matlub. I became someone who was respected and honored, and I became someone who was sought after. Subhanallah. Because of what he did, how he acquired the knowledge, how humble he was, the things that he did, subhanallah, the effort that he exerted in acquiring the knowledge. Subhanallah. Because of how the effort that he exerted and how he humbled himself, Allah Ta'ala raised his rank and He made him aziz, He made him respected, and He made him sought after. People used to come to him to learn. The companions used to come to him to learn. The children of the companions used to come to him to learn. The tabi'een, who are the students of the companions, used to come to him to learn. He was sought after, subhanallah. And this is an endowment. When people come to you and they have a need that they want you to fulfill for them, this is an endowment. The scholars of Islam said, مِن نِعَمِ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكَ حَاجَةُ النَّاسِ إِلَيْكَ. From the many endowments of Allah is Allah Ta'ala making you in need of the people, or making the people in need of you. When the people come to you with a haja, with a need, with a necessity that they need you to fulfill, this is an endowment. Why? Because when you help them, what happens? They benefit, and also you benefit because you help them. So yes, from the endowments of Allah is that Allah Ta'ala makes people need you. Subhanallah. And this is Abdullah ibn Abbas was needed from the people, and they used to seek a lot of knowledge from him. MashaAllah. And he's also narrated that once Abdullah ibn Abbas, many people came and surrounded his house. Many people, hundreds of people surrounded his house, and they wanted to learn from him. Subhanallah. So his servant told him, Ya ibn Abbas, there are people outside and they seek knowledge. So Abdullah ibn Abbas went inside, he performed his purification, he went back to his servant and he said, O servant, go outside and tell them, whoever is seeking the knowledge of the Quran, let them come in. Only people that want to seek the knowledge of the Quran, let them come in. Only people that want to seek the knowledge of the Quran. So they came in and they filled his house until there wasn't space to sit down. They filled it entirely, subhanallah. So they asked him questions and he would answer. Someone else would ask him another question and he would answer. Like this, back and forth until anyone who had a question had an answer to their question. And then they left. And then he went to his servant and he said, go tell whoever is seeking the knowledge of fiqh, let them come inside. Then a bunch of people came inside and they filled his house as they did the first time, and they asked questions and he would answer them. They asked more questions, he would answer them. They asked more questions, he would answer them until he answered everybody's question. And then they left. Then he went to his servant a third time and he said, go and tell whoever is seeking knowledge of the Arabic language, let him come inside. So they came inside and they filled his room, filled the house like they did the first time, and they asked questions and he answered. They asked questions, he answered. They asked questions and he answered. Back and forth until they had an answer, subhanallah. Just imagine how many people came to seek knowledge from him and how knowledgeable he was that he answered every single one. This is from the endowments that Allah Ta'ala gave him. He was very knowledgeable. May Allah Ta'ala enable us to benefit from his knowledge. Ameen, ameen, ya Allah, ameen, subhanallah. And as we mentioned, he was very young, mashallah, when he was learning. And Umar ibn al-Khattab did not prevent his age, from being a barrier from him benefiting the people. So what Umar ibn al-Khattab used to do, he would take Abdullah ibn al-Abbas and he would bring him into the sessions of knowledge where the elderly people were. And he wouldn't allow for anybody else. So the other people, the elders that were in that session of knowledge that were there, they thought, what's wrong? Why does Umar ibn al-Khattab allow for this Abdullah ibn Abbas to come inside, who was a child, and he doesn't allow for our children to come inside? They were wondering, what makes him so special? So they asked Umar ibn al-Khattab, and he said he is from the same source of knowledge as you. Meaning he's very knowledgeable and he deserves to be here just as you deserve to be here. Even though he's a child, age does not matter. Age does not matter. So then Abdullah ibn Abbas, Umar brought him in once. And he wanted to prove a point. Umar ibn Khattab wanted to prove a point that Abdullah ibn Abbas deserves to be here with the elders. So he brought them and he gathered them and he asked them a question, the elders. He said, what is the meaning of the verse, Surah Al-Nasr, إِذَا جَاءَ نَصْرُ اللَّهِ وَالْفَتْحِ وَرَأَيْتَ النَّاسَ يَدْخُلُونَ فِي دِينِ اللَّهِ أَفْوَاجًا فَسَبِّحْ بِحَمْدِ رَبِّكَ وَاسْتَغْفِرْهُ إِنَّهُ كَانَ تَوَّابًا. What is the meaning of this surah? He asked the elders, one of the elders. So they answered his question, and they gave a very general meaning. That if victory comes to the Muslims and people begin to embrace Islam in waves, then praise Allah that this is from the endowments of Allah, so you should thank Allah. And this is the general meaning they gave to this surah, this elder. So Umar ibn Khattab, he asked Abdullah ibn Abbas, is this the meaning that you see? Then Abdullah ibn Abbas said no. MashaAllah, he said no. Then Umar asked him, what is the meaning, or what's in this surah? MashaAllah, he said that this is an indication that the Prophet ﷺ is going to pass away soon. Imagine, this is how he answered the question, subhanallah. Then he explained himself, إِذَا جَاءَ نَصْرُ اللَّهِ وَالْفَتْحِ. When victory and the opening of countries begin to occur to the Muslims, that this is an indication that the Prophet ﷺ is going to pass away. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ, was he not sent to convey the message of Islam to the people and to convey to the different tribes? This was the Prophet ﷺ was ordered to do this. So when his job or his task was being fulfilled, that the Prophet ﷺ, yes, he was conveying the message and he was fulfilling his obligation. He was fulfilling what Allah Ta'ala sent him to do. So is this not an indication that his message is being complete, that it's almost complete? So yes, when the people begin to embrace Islam and the victory comes to the Muslims, the Prophet ﷺ is conveying his message and he's doing his job. So if the Prophet _ﷺ is doing his job, then then he's about to pass away soon, because he's doing what he was sent to do. So his message is being complete. MashaAllah. So this is what he said. And in this surah, there is an indication that the Prophet ﷺ is going to pass away. So Umar, the great Al-Faruq, said, this is what I agree upon, and this is my opinion also. Imagine, subhanAllah, a child answering, and Umar ibn Khattab, and saying that this is something I agree with. And this is the same interpretation and meaning that I see in this surah. And he was a child, subhanAllah. So yes, he did deserve to be among those elders. And this was an incident that occurred that showed that Abdullah ibn Abbas, he had knowledge sometimes more than people who were older than him. Subhanallah, even though he was young. May Allah Ta'ala raise his rank, mashallah. May Allah Ta'ala raise his rank. And in the later stages of his life, Abdullah ibn Abbas, he became blind, subhanallah. He lost his sight. And he died, and he was buried in a place called Ta'if, mashallah. And when they were burying him, Abdullah ibn Abbas, they dug the grave and they put his body inside. And before they closed and they sealed the grave, a bird came and went straight into his grave, mashallah. A white bird came out of nowhere, flew, and it was intending his grave, subhanallah. How often do you see a bird come and go into a grave? People are around the grave. A bird's not going to come and fly directly inside, subhanallah. This is what happened. A bird came into his grave. So they went inside and they wanted to see what's going on, and they couldn't find the bird, nor could they find Abdullah ibn Abbas, his body. They didn't know what happened to it, subhanallah. And they closed it, they sealed the grave, they put the dirt on top of it, and when they finished closing the grave, they heard some Quran being recited from the grave. MashaAllah, they heard some Quran being recited from the grave. And the verses that were being recited, Ya ayyatuha an-nafsul mutma'innah, irji'i ila rabbiki radiyatan mardiyah, fadkhuli fi ibadi, wadkhuli jannati. MashaAllah. And these verses, and this whole incident that occurred with the bird coming in and the Quran being recited from his grave, MashaAllah, emanating from the grave, is an indication that he had a high status, and this is a good thing for him. MashaAllah. So this whole thing that occurred with the bird and him not being present, they're not finding his body in the grave, and then the Quran being recited, is a good sign. It's a good indication. This is something good for Abdullah ibn Abbas, and shows that he has a high status. MashaAllah. May Allah Ta'ala raise his rank. Ameen.
Allah, 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 Ya